There's an attitude about pigs that they're disgusting, they're just dirty creatures, and they kind of just want them dead. And I've talked to people that go helicopter hunting, and I go, well, what do you do with all the pigs? And they're like, you leave them there. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, that doesn't seem...
There is a piece of trail camera footage that changed the way wildlife managers in Texas think about the entire feral hog problem. It was not captured during a dramatic helicopter sweep or a coordinated removal operation. It came from a routine infrared camera positioned along a brush line on a working cattle ranch in central Texas. The ranch hands who pull the memory card expected to find evidence of hog activity, rooting patterns, feeding behavior, maybe the size of a sounder moving through the property. What they found instead sent the footage up the chain immediately, past the ranch foreman, past the county extension agent, and straight into the hands of federal wildlife biologists who would spend days reviewing it before saying anything at all. What was on that footage was not a pack of hogs tearing through a grain field. It was not a sounder of 50 animals plowing up 20 acres of pasture land in a single night. It was something far quieter, far stranger, and far more significant than any of that. It was a glimpse at what is actually happening in a Texas landscape beneath the surface of every trapping program, every helicopter flight, and every government eradication initiative that has consumed hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 3 decades. And it starts not with the hogs themselves, but with the sheer, staggering scale of what those hogs have already done to this country. Wild hogs were first brought to the New World by Christopher Columbus, released to multiply on Caribbean islands as a food supply for future explorers. This practice continued through the 16th and 17th centuries, spreading into what is today the southern United States. Spanish expeditions moving along the Gulf Coast released domestic pigs into the wild with a simple logic: leave animals behind, return later, eat them. The pigs had different plans. They vanished into the forests and moved inland, breeding without check and adapting to every terrain they encountered. By the time European settlement had spread across the continent, these animals were already deeply embedded in the American South. Then a second wave arrived. Feral hogs in Texas are a crossbreed between domesticated swine and Eurasian wild boar, the latter of which was imported in the early 20th century by wealthy hunters who wanted a more challenging quarry. Those Eurasian boar were leaner, more aggressive, and built by centuries of survival across some of the harshest terrain on Earth. When they inevitably escaped their enclosures, they interbred with the feral domestic pigs already roaming free across the South. What emerged from that crossing was something neither ancestor could have produced alone. Stronger, more adaptable, faster reproducing, and significantly more intelligent than either parent species, the hybrid feral hog that now dominates the American landscape is one of the most formidable invasive animals ever introduced to this continent. With reproductive rates that allow populations to double in as little as 4 months, their geographic range and damage footprint grow rapidly without intensive eradication efforts. A single mature sow can produce 2 litters per year, with each litter containing up to a dozen piglets. The mathematics of that reproduction rate make containment extraordinarily difficult to sustain. Every removed animal is replaced faster than the removal can be sustained. In 2024, the feral hog population in Texas alone totaled 2.9 million. They are found in nearly all counties in the Lone Star State. Across the rest of the United States, USDA reports show that feral hogs have been seen in at least 35 states, with approximately 6 million wild hogs now present nationwide, a number that continues to grow quickly. This is not a wildlife nuisance. It is an occupation. The damage feral hogs inflict on the American landscape is not abstract. It is not limited to farmers complaining about rooted-up fields. Feral hogs cause an estimated $1.6 billion in annual agricultural losses across 13 states. In Texas alone, damages total an estimated $871 million. These numbers are not projections or estimates built on assumptions. They come from coordinated surveys compiled by the USDA's National Feral Swine Damage Management Program, the National Wildlife Research Center, and the National Agricultural Statistics Service, the most detailed economic assessment of feral swine damage ever conducted. The combined cost of $474 million and over 17 million labor hours spent annually across both crop and livestock sectors underscores how much is required just to maintain the status quo. That is not the cost of winning. That is the cost of not losing any faster than the current rate. And even that calculation understates the full picture because it excludes the hidden costs that never appear in official tallies, the fuel and extra hours required to harvest hog-damaged fields, the replanting costs, the livestock veterinary bills, and the psychological toll of watching years of agricultural work destroyed in a single night. Feral swine have been found rooting up crops, damaging fences, eroding pastures, and directly preying on young livestock. In urban and suburban areas, they have torn apart golf courses, destroyed residential landscaping, contaminated water sources, and damaged underground utility infrastructure. According to the USDA, an estimated 10% of feral swine are likely infected with brucella, a bacterial infection capable of spreading to other animals and humans. They also carry African swine fever, a disease that has devastated pig populations across Europe and Asia, and which wildlife officials in Texas now consider one of the most serious biosecurity threats facing the state's agricultural industry. They also pose broad ecological challenges by killing small livestock, damaging wildlife habitat, spreading invasive plants, and disturbing water systems. At military installations, they have disrupted operations. In rural counties, they have cost individual farmers their entire season's income in a single night. In at least one documented case in Harris County, Texas, a woman was fatally attacked by feral hogs outside her own home. The animal built like it knows nobody can stop it, because for the better part of 3 decades, that has been precisely the case. The official response to the feral hog crisis followed a predictable pattern for most of the past 30 years. Trap them. Shoot them. Push them off one property and onto the next. Repeat the process and hope the numbers eventually come down. They never did. Conventional cage traps set with fermented corn bait were among the earliest tools deployed at scale across Texas. The logic was sound on paper. Lure the animals into an enclosure and remove them from the population. The feral hog's intelligence made that logic obsolete almost immediately. Feral hogs are highly intelligent. Studies show hogs have similar cognitive abilities as dogs or chimpanzees. They live in socially complex family groups that work for the benefit and survival of individual members. They learn from their daily experiences, encounters, and from other hogs. What that means in practice is that a trap that catches part of a sounder and allows the rest to escape has not solved anything. It has produced a group of survivors who now associate that specific type of enclosure with danger, and who will pass that aversion on to their offspring. When even a few hogs escape, they associate danger with that location and will actively avoid it. A study in Florida found that feral hogs had actually learned to raid baited traps without getting caught. Researchers observed these animals using sticks and branches to prop open trapdoors, access the bait, and escape before the mechanism triggered. This is not anecdote. This is documented tool use from an animal that most people assume operates on pure instinct. The result of decades of partial trapping across Texas has been a feral hog population that is, in some measurable respects, smarter and more cautious around human intervention than it was when those programs began. Aerial hunting appeared to change the equation. Helicopter operations offered something ground-based methods could not: the ability to cover enormous amounts of terrain quickly and engage animals before they could scatter into brush. Since 2004, aerial gunners in Texas have killed approximately 79,000 hogs. That sounds significant until you place it against the scale of the problem. Overall, helicopter hunting in Texas kills roughly 43,000 pigs per year, which represents only about 1 to 2% of the state's total hog population. A study conducted in Texas found that aerial gunning can remove approximately 31% of a feral hog population in a single flight, with subsequent flights increasing that percentage to 56% and then 67%. But the population rebounds before the next flight can be scheduled. The hogs that escape scatter into new territory, and the cycle resets. Wildlife officials estimate that just to hold the population steady, 60 to 70% of the hogs in a given area must be killed every year. Not to reduce the population, not to drive them toward local eradication, just to prevent the numbers from climbing. By that benchmark, no program currently operating in Texas is achieving even a holding pattern across the state as a whole. There is something worse hidden inside those numbers. Aggressive hunting and trapping pressure does not only fail to reduce hog populations. In some documented cases, it actively accelerates their spread. Hogs that escape a removal operation do not simply return to where they came from. They move. They push into neighboring counties, establish contact with new sounders, and begin breeding in territory that was previously clear. Aggressive hunting can drive populations out of remote forests toward populated areas, or into natural biomes that are even more fragile than the ones they are already damaging. The harder the pressure, the wider the dispersal. Every helicopter flight that clears a ranch in one county may be seeding the problem into the next. The USDA has spent over $75 million through its National Feral Swine Damage Management Program, and the current estimate of at least $2.5 billion in annual national damages is a significant increase from the 2014 estimate of $1.5 billion. The money went in. The damage got worse. Nobody wanted to say it plainly in a conference room, but the data kept saying it anyway. The playbook was not working. Back to that footage from Central Texas. The trail cameras positioned along brush lines across the region were originally placed to track hog movement patterns, which direction sounders traveled, what hours they were most active, which parts of a property they preferred. Reviewing the footage became routine. Researchers expected to see hogs. What they began noticing, quietly at first, was something else entirely moving through the same brush at the same hours. Coyotes, not scattered individuals scavenging the edges of a field. Coyotes moving in coordinated groups of 3 and 4, working specific areas of the brushline with a deliberateness that drew immediate attention from anyone who reviewed the footage carefully. Field researchers working the Texas Hill Country began finding something they cannot immediately explain. Feral hog nest sites, the shallow brushline beds where sows shelter their newborn piglets, were turning up excavated and empty. Not raided by hunters. Not sprung by traps. Physically dug up and cleared out, with coyote tracks pressed into the soil around them. The biology seemed wrong on its face. A coyote weighing 30 to 35 pounds has no business confronting a feral sow that may weigh 200 pounds or more, an animal capable of goring or trampling a coyote in seconds. Every wildlife textbook said the same thing. Coyotes and feral hogs occupy overlapping territory, but do not engage as predator and prey. The adult hog is simply too large, too aggressive, and too dangerous for a coyote to target directly. That framing was correct. It was also missing the point entirely. The coyotes were not going after the adults. They had identified a completely different vulnerability in the feral hog's reproductive cycle. The piglets. Newborn feral hogs, in the first days and weeks of life, are small, slow, and entirely dependent on the protection of their mother. A sow cannot be in two places at once. She has to forage. She has to leave the nest, even briefly. And in the Texas brush, at 2 in the morning, those brief absences were becoming something else, an opening. The infrared footage showed coordinated hunting behavior from coyotes that bore no resemblance to the scavenging and opportunistic behavior typically documented in this species. A lead animal approaching a nest from downwind, staying low, keeping below the sow's field of vision. Flanking animals moving into position from either side simultaneously. The decoy, a coyote sprinting past the edge of the nest at speed, close enough to trigger the sow's defensive response, fast enough to avoid being caught. The sow wheels around 200 pounds of fury, trying to process the direction of the threat and commit to a charge. While she is still processing, the flanking animals have already reached the nest. One bite. The piglet is limp. Both coyotes are back in the tree cover before the sow completes her defensive turn. The entire sequence taking 5 seconds or less. This was not random predation. This was a coordinated tactical system. And the trail cameras were capturing it happening repeatedly across multiple properties in what appeared to be an organized and learned behavior pattern spreading through coyote populations in high-density hog territory. Laboratory analysis provided the confirmation that the footage alone could not. Researchers examining stomach contents from coyotes captured across the region found undigested feral hog piglet tissue at rates that made the casual opportunism explanation impossible to sustain. Multiple studies examining coyote scat samples collected across Texas and Georgia found piglet DNA present in roughly 30% of samples. Not occasional. Not coincidental. Systematic, generation-level predation operating across multiple states and operating completely below the radar of every official hog control program running in the country. Every wildlife management program fighting the feral hog crisis had been focused on a single number: adult hog removal rate. How many animals were killed this quarter? How many sounders were cleared from this property? How many pounds of hog came out of this county this year? The underlying assumption was that the adult animals were the problem, and removing adult animals was the solution. Coyotes had arrived at a completely different analysis. They were not targeting what currently existed. They were targeting what was coming next. The piglet is not just a small hog. It is the entire next cycle of reproduction. A sounder that loses its litters does not double in 4 months. It does not double at all. It ages. It weakens. And over several breeding seasons, without successful piglet survival, it collapses. The math works in a way that no adult removal program has ever been able to replicate. Removing adults from a feral hog population triggers a biological response. The survivors breed harder, produce larger litters, and fill the gap within a season. Removing piglets before they can survive to reproduce does something different. It attacks the generational cycle itself. It does not produce a compensatory response because the adults that remain cannot simply produce more young fast enough to outpace sustained predation at the nest level. In areas where coyote populations remained healthy and undisturbed, researchers began documenting something that had never appeared in the data before. Feral hog numbers were not climbing. In some localized areas, they were measurably declining, not because of trap removals or helicopter flights, but because piglet survival rates were dropping in ways that correlated directly with coyote density. Here is where the story takes a turn that nobody in any official capacity was comfortable discussing publicly for a long time. While coyotes were quietly developing one of the most effective biological checks on feral hog populations ever observed in the American landscape, state programs across the South were paying people to eliminate them. Coyote bounty programs, active across multiple Texas counties and neighboring states during the 2010s, offered cash payments for every coyote brought in dead. The programs were popular. Hunters collected thousands of bounties. Coyote populations in participating areas dropped significantly, and in counties where those reductions were most dramatic, feral hog numbers, which should have been falling alongside everything else that was being thrown at them, instead climbed sharply. The connection was not immediately obvious to program administrators because nobody had been tracking coyote populations and hog piglet survival rates as related variables. They were managed by entirely different agencies, under entirely different mandates, with no coordination between them. The bounty programs were run out of agriculture departments worried about livestock predation. The hog eradication programs were run out of wildlife services and the USDA. Neither group was looking at what the other was accidentally undoing. Despite the scale of the problem, one of the most successful tools against feral hogs, the Feral Swine Eradication and Control Pilot Program, currently lacks funding. Projects under this program led to notable successes, including reduced crop losses, improved yields, and substantial labor savings. In Georgia, for example, corn losses dropped from 65% to just 14% after project implementation. But even those results came from coordinated human intervention. The coyote data was suggesting something the program administrators had not yet been looking for, that in areas with healthy, established coyote populations operating without disturbance, hog population pressure was being suppressed at the generational level, not by humans, but by the ecosystem itself. A biological control mechanism that cost nothing to deploy, operated 7 nights a week in all weather conditions, required no fuel, no salary, no equipment maintenance, and no federal appropriation. And it had been quietly dismantled in the counties that needed it most. What the trail camera footage from Central Texas revealed, when everyone finally understood what they were watching, was not a new problem. It was a new frame for an old one. The feral hog crisis had always been viewed as a gap between what the landscape could naturally control and what human management could artificially achieve. The footage suggested the gap was smaller than anyone had assumed, but only in places where human activity had not already destroyed the natural side of the equation. Texas has since moved toward integrated management strategies that take seriously what the data is now showing. Cellular trail cameras and live-feed video systems now allow landowners and trappers to monitor traps in real time, receiving instant alerts and video footage directly to their phones, with remote gate control enabling whole sounder capture without disturbing the site between visits. Whole sounder trapping, capturing an entire family group simultaneously, rather than triggering a trap before all members are inside, can remove 70 to 90% of a local hog population in just 1 or 2 cycles. The technology enabling this approach, with solar-powered cameras connected to cellular networks and app-controlled trap gates, allows a rancher to watch in real time as a sounder feeds inside a pen, wait until every animal in the group is present, and drop the gate with a single tap on a phone screen. The intelligence that makes feral hogs so difficult to manage conventionally is, in this method, turned against them. Their social structure, the fact that sounders move together and establish patterns, becomes the vulnerability the trap exploits. Field testing of specialized toxicants delivered through feeders engineered to require the specific physical strength of a hog to open has also advanced, offering options that keep non-target wildlife safe while making the bait accessible only to animals capable of operating the feeder mechanism. But the larger shift in understanding goes beyond any single tool. Feral swine populations are concentrated in Texas, Georgia, and Florida, but are increasingly spreading across the southern and western United States. No trap, no helicopter, no government program operates everywhere those animals are moving at once. The coyote does. A healthy coyote population distributed across the same territory that feral hogs occupy does not need a budget cycle or a congressional appropriation or a field team to deploy. It operates continuously across every property line and county boundary, targeting the one vulnerability in the feral hog's otherwise formidable biology, the period before the next generation can protect itself. Mike Bodenchuk, State Director for USDA's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, has acknowledged that eradication of the feral pig is so lofty a goal it may not be what drives daily management decisions. The real motivation is the experience of having seen the impacts of feral pigs on people, fish, wildlife, and habitat. That framing of management as an ongoing practice rather than a winnable war is more honest than the language that surrounded feral hog programs for most of the last 3 decades. The goal was never realistic as stated. The methods were never proportionate to the scale of the problem. And the one mechanism that was proportionate, that was ecological in scale and free of operational cost, was being treated as a pest to be eliminated rather than an asset to be protected. The Blanco County footage that first circulated through wildlife offices and prompted urgent conversations among field biologists was not dramatic in the way that trail camera footage from a helicopter hunt is dramatic. There were no explosions of violence, no massive sounders scattering across an open field, no evidence of the kind of destruction that makes for compelling press releases about eradication operations. It was quiet footage, green-lit by infrared, showing small animals moving efficiently through brush in the early hours of the morning. Moving in formation. Moving with a precision that nobody expected to see from an animal most people dismiss as a scavenger. What it showed was the ecosystem doing something that 3 decades and hundreds of millions of dollars of human management had not been able to do. Applying sustained, generation-level pressure to a feral hog population from inside the ecological system that population had invaded. The true financial burden of feral hogs is broader than crop losses alone. It influences planting decisions, degrades pasture land, damages equipment and infrastructure, and consumes labor hours that could otherwise be devoted to production. Every dollar of that burden represents a failure not just of management programs, but of the broader assumption that the answer to an ecological problem can always be found outside the ecology. The feral hog crisis was treated as an agricultural pest problem from the beginning. The response was pest management, removal, suppression, eradication attempts. What the coyote data suggests is that it was always, at its core, an ecological problem, one that required an ecological response. The footage from that Texas brush line was disturbing not because of what it showed happening to the hogs. It was disturbing because of what it implied about everything that had been done before. The most effective response to one of the most destructive invasive species in American history was already in motion, already operational, already producing results in the places where it had been allowed to survive. It was doing it silently, at night, without acknowledgement or support or a single line item in any wildlife management budget. And the programs spending hundreds of millions of dollars to fight the hog were simultaneously spending money to kill it. That is the thing nobody wanted to say out loud in a conference room. The footage made it impossible to look away from anymore.